Hello everyone, good afternoon. Welcome to the DSCI Best Practice Meet 2021. This is the 13th edition of our flagship event. By looking at the digitalization context for the next decade, we have kept the theme for BPM 2021 to be Security Decade, enabling digitalization innovation of this decade. Welcome to the session on Colonial Pipeline Attack, Lessons for OT Security. What if money-oriented intent changed to crushing the critical public infrastructure? Colonial pipeline attack was one of the most recent cyber attack on OT infrastructure. The attack was carried by DarkSide Group. The session would focus more on the challenges, best practice for OT security, and also the possible target areas that's creating the cyber attack in the OT environment. Also, the panel will be giving the perspective on the security framework. We have an electric line of speakers deliberating on the colonial pipeline attack. We have Mr. Dr. Yask, CISO, IOCL. Welcome, Dr. Yask. Next, we have Ms. Sheetal, Cso BPCL. Welcome, Ms. Sheetal. And the next we have Mr. Amitabh Mukherjee, Director, Cybersecurity, Siemens. Welcome, Mr. Amitabh.
Hira, you can also welcome Neha. And sometimes she is already live.
Yeah. Also, I would request all the attendees to share their questions on a chat and a Q&A window. And the session would be moderated by Mr. Amitabh. Over to you, sir. Yeah. So we have Ms. Neha Taneja as well. She's from the Colonial Oil and Gas and the head of cybersecurity.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Over to you, Mr. Amitabh.
Thank you, Hira. It's a pleasure to have all of this eminent panelists in this particular topic. So maybe I'll just start with a brief introduction with all of you. So maybe if I can go first with maybe Dr. Yes, if you can briefly introduce yourself, please. I probably cannot hear you, Dr. Yes. Just check if it is you are on mute or not.
I am not on
Yeah,
mute.
now we can hear you, please. Yeah, please.
Okay, right. And so again, good afternoon, Amitabh. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I am Dr. Yask. I am CISO Indian Oil Corporation Limited, and I'm managing the cybersecurity. I'm part of the team which manages cybersecurity for the organization. And yes, hopefully, some of my opinions, some you would be sharing some of my views regarding the recent attacks. I'm looking forward to a healthy conversation.
It's nice to have you, Dr. Yes. Maybe Shithal, you
Thank
can
you.
spare a few, speaks a few lines. Yeah.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Mr. Amitabh and DSCI, for hosting me here in this eminent panel. I am CISO BPCL, Bharat Petroleum Corporation Limited. I'm heading the cybersecurity and GRC team in the organization.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Neha, maybe if you can introduce yourself, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Neha and I head the cybersecurity vertical for Keen Oil and Gas with Anta Limited. And I am also looking forward to share my views and thoughts coming back from a background of, initial association with BFSI in the cybersecurity domain. There are a lot of differences I see in my association with Keen. So those are some of the views which I look forward to share today.
Lovely. So we all set. I'm Amitav. I work for Siemens and take care of the cybersecurity, and it's a pleasure to have you all again. And thank you, DSCF, for having us. So maybe let's start with maybe some focused questions in line with the topic of our discussion today. Of late, we have seen a lot of prominence gaining across media, across our community, typically after this colonial pipeline incident in the US. We are speaking about legacy systems. We are speaking about vulnerable networks. We have also started, discussing about design with security in mind, and only reliance with probably, perimeter security approach may not work well. So maybe Dr. Yask, if you can share your views on this particular topic to start with. Dr. Yask.
Right. I think you mentioned a couple of things in your initial remarks. One, the legacy systems, in the perimeter security. Yes, it's a fact that perimeter security, not just in the OT environment, that's the ICS environment. I think in the IT also, it is not really working now. But couple of things, when we talk about ICS security, typically or traditionally, we have been looking at following. I mean, most of the organizations across the globe would generally like to follow the Purdue model hierarchical approach. The lower layer to the layers 0 and 1, which are the bottom two layers, generally would not talk to the top three layers. I mean, that is how the design is kept. There are firewalls in between to create barriers to the flow of data, stopping the flow of the data. However, one major change that has happened, in fact, that is one of the issues I think which all the security professionals, especially in the OT field, are facing, is now when we talk about an OT environment, it is actually incomplete unless we take into account the IIoTs. Now the sensors are deployed at the field level, and the data. The need is that the data has to go right from layer, let's say a layer 0 and layer 1 directly to the cloud for maybe predictive, preventive maintenance. So the hierarchical model that we earlier used to rely on, and again that perimeter concept, you having a firewall in between, probably at the perimeter layer, the edge has now moved. So that is one challenge. In fact, now designing a system to not just take care of the legacy systems or legacy devices, but also these new generation IoT devices, which are probably at the layer 0, not probably, no, definitely at layer 0 and 1. So this is one functional challenge that OT security people are facing, a functional oblique operational. Another one, I think, the standard ones, the lack of expertise from the vendors, the dependence too much on the OEM vendors, the proprietary protocols being used, and we are trying to bring the IT security in the OT domain. Uh, but these are the operational ones. I think one very important challenge is also the administrative one. Although we have been talking a lot about it, the OT people do not have the kind of confidence to let the IT security people come into their domain. I think there is a huge need. In fact, all the security professionals, I'm sure, would agree with me when I say that there is a huge need now to have a kind of a purple team, which is not just the IT. It is a composition. It is composed of both the IT and the OT people. Therefore, that is the administrative challenge and the functional challenge. I'm sorry if I hope I am on time. Right. So these are two things that I would want to bring forward.
Thank you so much. I just put a note of whatever certain key points. So maybe if I go to maybe Neha. So we also have information, or we have also received certain updates about certain executive orders being released post this pipeline attack, and probably we are also thinking of different concepts, different approach to address this OT security topic. And of late, we are also working on zero trust concept or zero trust approach. What is your view about approaching implementing maybe this zero trust concept into the OT environment? What is your take on this?
One word which I would draw from what Dr. Yas said is about, again, the legacy concept, the way OT cybersecurity has evolved over the years. And when you talk about zero trust, zero trust is more effective as the, components, the foundation components above and below it. So if you do not have your, remote accesses, your vulnerability and patch management processes sorted and, working effectively, the view to zero trust, and then having zero trust in the OT environment, you may not even be able to analyze those certain protocols to kind of determine that what is the level of micro segmentation which you need, what is the what is the analytics which how is your response going to be there. And then the legacy protocols, and then the multi vendor and complex environment. And secondly, OT evolved as a point in solution approach. It has not been like a holistic architectural approach to cybersecurity element of OT, the way IT security traditionally evolved. And as Dr. Yas said, these two now need to kind of tie up to go in tandem. Like the Purdue concept no longer may be sufficient to address your the emerging risk, especially with the colonial pipeline taking a huge importance. A directive has come. We need to understand that let's do a preparatory approach. Let's not wait for a directive in our context to be there and draw from the directive and have our specific scenarios around ransomware or as a part of our mock drills, incident response plan. So there's a lot of challenge to the OT in terms of you cannot directly replicate a concept in IT to OT. You cannot retrofit those concepts. Considering, as I said, zero trust will not take care of your foundation problems around the resources, the vulnerability management and the patch management. And at times you would be giving remote access to vendors also, which would include privileged access on the OT environment. So that those are few of the pointers which I feel that zero trust has its own limitations of directly replicating it into the OT environment as is.
Thanks, Neha. So, if I can ask now, maybe Shital, that OEMs typically into the domain of OT, uh, upgrading their application layer or maybe their operating systems is not something probably which has been really designed or planned the way that probably IT works. Now, with increasing adaptation of say digitalization in the manufacturing space, uh, what will be your take or your views in deploying security concepts into the OT environments?
So, as you rightly said, Amitava, on one side we do have these traditional OT systems, which are old, or say these require substantial cost for their upgrade. Even their downtimes are difficult. Managing all that, it's a huge effort, kind of. This is older generation. And on the other side, we have IoT devices, which are kind of new age devices. But typically, these devices have limited processing power, or say updates. These are non-updatable firmwares they do have. In short, there is again some limitation when it comes to handle the security between these OT and IoT devices. So, if we apply security by design kind of principles in case of IoT, at least, then this gap between OT and IoT can be bridged. When I'm talking about security by design, what I mean is the devices which we are going to deploy for IoT, if we see whether they have, say, OSs, proper OSs, or firmware which can be upgradable. Then few vendors have come out with devices having TPM chips, by which even the hardware itself can have inbuilt security, chip-based security in it. That also can be explored. When these devices are communicating with the OT system, whether those channels are encrypted, whether we can monitor that data traffic, that we need to see. When these devices are storing some data, whether that data is getting encrypted or not, even that can be looked into. And most important thing is the life cycle management of these devices, right from deployment to the disposal, the safety, say whether we can identify the assets, their inventory can be managed, vulnerability assessment can be done or not. All these aspects need to be looked into. Patching can be done or not. And again, with all these, you need to have a stronger network segmentation. And what Neha pointed out, the basic hygiene of OT system is must.
Thanks, Shital. Just maybe slightly stretching this a little bit. As we all know that legacy systems typically in OT, the life span of an IT component, OT component is always different. So in that context, what should be the necessary steps that you may leverage or you may probably propose in this particular case?
Right. Again, we need to start from our basics. we need to maintain the inventory. And this inventory right now, probably we are maintaining at a periodic times or so. Whether that is sufficient or not, we need to look into. Or we should have auto discovery kind of solutions implemented in the OT system itself, so that the inventory remains up to date at any point of time. That is more important. Once you know this inventory, then what kind of measures or hardening measures can be taken, that we can decide. And these measures also can be just like simple, like disable the guest account or change of default password. We need to maintain kind of say allow list of applications. Again, when we are maintaining these applications, whether file fingerprinting can be used for baselining the file which are given by the OT vendors. Again, USB access by default need to be disabled, but at times OT vendors require this access. So whether these USBs can be checked, whether they are good enough. There are solutions in the market which can be checked. Some software-based, some hardware-based solutions are there. Those can be explored. When I'm talking about all that, again, the OEM has to be, OT OEM has to be kept in the loop, because many a times our dependency, lot of dependency is there on them. So we cannot have one solution fit all kind of scenario in this particular case to case basis. We need to identify what are those risks and how we can mitigate those risks.
Thank you so much. In the meantime, we just received two queries in the chat. I think one is from Prantik. Prantik wants to know what is CSIRT. So, Prantik, though I do not know exactly if you have any further questions behind it. So, typically, CSIRT actually represents Computer Security Incident Response Team. So that's what CSIT stands for. And I have one more query from Raja. He's trying to understand, are there any governance regulation for OT? So in India, I think this is still in the process of making. We have certain guidelines, controls, standards. So typically in OT, we take help from IEC 62443 standards to start with. But nevertheless, the governance or the regulations or the policies are in the pipeline. I'm sure will be there. So now again, coming back to our panelist, maybe Neha, uh, response and resiliency plans uh, to the extent of OT environment. So typically, if I say cyber response and resiliency plans, realignment to OT aspects. So what will be your suggestion? What will be your views, if you can share?
Yeah, so this point specifically is, though it's a subset of overall, incident response plan, but traditionally the incident response plans, the way they have been designed, have been more around IT in mind, downtimes in mind. Or if I were to compare to my previous experience as the BFSI sector, I was in a credit card industry. So, the downtime on website would be a direct hit, a noticeable hit. But what I would want to emphasize over here is that maybe these incident response plans, it's about time that they are realigned, keeping the OT specific part in mind. For example, the ransomware got implemented in the OT space. Are they trained enough to respond? Are they trained enough to respond? Are they trained enough to respond? Strategy? Is there a direction sense that whether what will be your approach, whether you would go ahead and be taking a decision which is around, maybe you have to pay the ransom, or maybe you don't have to have you checked your backups and all, or what is the approach you're going to. So my take over here is that when you have your mock drills or mock incident response assessments, have scenarios baked into from OT perspective. Maybe draw example from the Colonial pipeline, and though that attack happened from the IT, perpetuating to OT, the risk perpetuated from the remote access to the OT side. But having said that, maybe the OT side of, the people managing those systems, they need to be more involved in designing these incident response strategies, so that they are well aware and well in, they are able to contain a situation better. So that is where I talk of resilience when I say that bake it into the incident response plan of the organization, going beyond the IT component.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, OT resilience is also
Is it
equally
okay
important.
if I add one or two
Sure,
points
sure,
more
sure,
to
sure.
what
Please,
Neha has said?
please.
Neha is bang on the target when she talks about this resiliency and all. Here, more collaboration is required from IT and even OT. Both these teams need to work together. In case of these OT systems, we may not able to carry out because these are live systems, are kind of are untouchables at that particular point of time when they are operating. We may have some tabletop exercises which can with scenario based exercises, and that will help both these teams to understand the issues and look into the final part of it.
Yeah, good. That's a very good view. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
and
maybe,
adding on, yeah, and
please,
adding
please.
on to one more point over here, as we said about the collaboration, a previous pointer you said about regulations. I think when we have specific regulations around the reporting and the plans around how we deal with such situations, like if I were to draw a parallel, as I said, RBI mandates certain things on the NBFCs in terms of even incident response. So if we have those directives for India as well, as you said, they are in pipeline, I think then the situation would evolve, as Sheetal said, wherein we would have more collaboration and a definite way to address these issues.
Yeah. So maybe before we go to the next question, we have two more queries from the people who are attending it. So I think there is a question from Niranjan Singh. What are your views on following risks like temperature, pressure, light, wind, humidity, and vibration? So, anybody would like to take up this question? So, this is something probably it's more to do not to do with typical OT security as such. So, maybe we go to the next topic. It is from Sandeep Jadhav. He says when OT, IT, and IoT are three different environments. OEM who can cater all in silos, will that resolve the issue? So typically, I think Sandeep is trying to understand. We have to probably look into the convergence of OT, IT, and IoT in a very holistic approach. And anybody would like to add any comment? Maybe Dr. Yash or Sheetal, Neha, anybody? Yeah.
Right. Right. So as I said, see, yes, this is one of the issue, one of the challenge that we are all facing. OT, IoT, and IT, dependency on the OEMs and especially the IoT part. See, the challenge with the IoT as these devices are not designed for security at all. I think Sheetal already mentioned this part that these sensors or whatever devices that we are deploying are never catered to or never designed to cater to any kind of a security requirement. One, two, there are a lot of new players in this field. So the IoT sensors are being manufactured like crazy. Some estimates say there are already some couple of billion IoT already deployed. So yes, and on the other side, if you look at the kind of attacks that we have seen, especially the supply chain attack, something which has happened in not exactly in my environment, but it's still affecting me. Yes, it's a huge challenge, and operating them in silos, I do not know what exactly would that mean. Nothing can operate in silo now. Gone are the days of even a typical air-gapped environment. Nothing works in silo. Everything has to converge. Everything has to work in the same platform, same environment. Yes, it's certainly a challenge, and probably some tools or something is going to come out, which is going to help converge all these three together.
Thank you, Dr. Yes, for sharing your views. So before we go to the next question, maybe I'll request Niranjan if you can help us to understand or maybe rephrase your question for our better understanding. So maybe let's go back to Neha once, sorry, Dr. Yes, once again. Now, this OT security architecture as a holistic approach, similar to that we typically follow in IT security architecture. What will be your immediate, maybe the top three, which you would like to consider if we are trying to, give a direction about a holistic approach to address the architecture of OT security?
Right. all, even the IT architecture is now in a phase of transition. We typically used to work in an on-prem environment, then started moving to cloud. Now it is a hybrid model, multi-cloud model. So even the IT security architecture, there is one, first of all, no fixed. I think Neha probably mentioned that one solution does not fit all. That's so true in the IT world, and OT obviously that is not going to work. But however, if you ask what are the bigger, the general direction in which one has to look at or one has to think on, then one, I think it is not just the detection part. It is now one has to look at the prevention part also, which is what we are doing in the IT field as well. And the basic, the foundation, knowing the assets, where exactly the assets are lying, what all is there, to finding out the vulnerabilities and the threats. These are the three most, the basicest thing, as I would say, or foundational requirements. You need to necessarily know them. In fact, you know what? We have been talking security, especially in the OT, for the past almost a decade and a half now. Still, even after 10, 12, 15 odd years, we are still struggling with the first step of getting the security, which is finding the assets in the environment. So I think you have to, especially in the OT environment, you have to look at the basics first. A holistic approach is simple: know the assets, know the vulnerabilities, know the threats, start plugging them, and look at the flow of the data. The as I said earlier, the perimeter has now moved. In fact, it has dissolved. We are looking at the edge, which is sitting right inside the network. So the approach has to be based on the requirements of the business. Obviously, one cannot say no to business and say that I would not allow the data to go, let's say, from a layer zero. I mean, if I put a sensor at that layer, it has to necessarily flow to the cloud, otherwise it defeats the purpose. So therefore, the approach has to be around the objectives, not the other way around. That is, I mean, if that somehow answers the question that you are asking.
Yeah, that's fine. So maybe we move forward to Neha once again. And so extension of this, security operation centers. So what will be your view that if you really would like to have some kind of, a SIM solution, and that will take care of the OT specific use cases as well. Is it possible to extend the existing IT SOC, probably to take a leverage of solutions which are available in the market?
So, one point which even Dr. Yas touched upon is the holistic aspect. So, when we talk of OT SIM, maybe it gives us more situational awareness as well. And you cannot extend your IT SOC use cases to OT. But having said that, if you have any kind of security analytics, that would help you on the asset discovery part as well, on the the communication as well, which we said, that communication between layers, what is the anomalous behavior, and then also give you a view on your vulnerabilities. While how you fix those and how you prioritize those risks will depend on the business and the organization context, but it will help you get your situational awareness and move towards a cohesive ecosystem in terms of defining your priorities, that okay, vulnerability management is something, asset related component is something I want to fix first. So it will give you a futuristic roadmap in terms of what to prioritize on. And as you raised the first question on zero trust, the inputs from these analysis could also become a foundation or a starting point of how to extend the zero trust principle also, because the basic premise of having a complete situational awareness around OT first needs to be addressed before you could decide on how do you go about implementing other solutions around OT.
Lovely. Thank you. So we have some time, so maybe we can probably explore and deliberate on this topic a little more. So Shithal, since you come from a specific background which caters to the national critical infrastructure, so from that particular perspective, what will be your view about the current threats that we probably are aware of, which is happening around the globe, vis-a-vis the kind of national critical infrastructure protection you know, s- posture in our country. So, what, typically from OT cybersecurity perspective, What do you think should be our topmost priority going forward?
Basically, in our country, the laws to protect this kind of infrastructure are major facing, and we should have this as a first place, so that this can be a deterrent factor for ladies or someone else. Never know how we get exposed to this type of say vulnerabilities, and even in the case of say colonial attack, the attacker said it was not meant to disrupt the say environment, or they don't want to disrupt the pipeline as such. It was purely based on the money part of it. So if it is known, basically, if this infrastructure is very, very critical and for the national security, if it is known, then the views of the attackers may get changed. And for that purpose, defining this infrastructure as the critical one is also a gazette notification. And I think NCIPC is working on that part of it. That need to be speeded up.
Thank you so much for your views. So we have a question from Sandeep, who just rephrased his question like this. He says OT and IT convergence, which is going to bring security to IoT, and all the environment being different, will providing cybersecurity in form of unidirectional firewall for each environment will resolve the issue. So I don't know if maybe Dr. Yask, you would like to comment on this.
Right. So, yes, there have been a lot of talk of having these data diodes, unidirectional. But the point is that are we a typical environment? Is it only unidirectional? How often do you see that it is a unidirectional requirement? Is it not? I mean, let's first acknowledge that that is not the case. I can always propose a data diode and say that it is going to be unidirectional, but then I would also need to provision for a bypass in case the data has to flow from the other side. See, the point is that I should not restrict. Security should not be about restricting something. If the business requires the data to flow from both the sides, and it has to flow on both the sides, I need to ensure security on top of it. I would not really advocate for that approach. Yes, it helps in certain cases, in certain very specific organizations, some specific requirements. Especially when we are talking about, you mentioned about CII. When we are talking about industries or areas where you're talking about, very highly classified work is being done. Yes, in those areas, but that is a very, very small area. I am not a proponent of this approach of having data diodes. I think there are other measures or other controls that need to be thought of and deployed in that environment. And again, it is all the three. IoT can never be, although it is meant to send the data to one side, but eventually the results or the actions have to be taken on based on that data. So, I mean, short answer, data diode is not the answer for all the industries. For very
Yeah,
specific ones, maybe.
thank you. And I can also see already Neha and Shital has already touched on this topic, directly or indirectly, saying that one size fits all approach will not fit, and even retrofitting of our existing solutions will not address. So probably, Sandeep, we could answer your question, and if you have any other questions, feel free to put them on the chat board. In the meantime, maybe I can again make one more round of discussions with our eminent panelists. Maybe this time let's start with Neha. So maybe what will be your best practice sharing for the people, that colleagues or for the peer community which you have in this call? What will be your best practices that you'd like to share, keeping OT cybersecurity in mind?
As I think, as I said, holistic, parallel to the way the thought was given to IT architecture evolving, that kind of thought is required. And if I were to prioritize certain areas in terms of specific domains, then vulnerability management and the incident response automation, detection and response automation, and maybe if some component of resiliency, and could be more around trying to have specific, very specific use case based drills, where while I know we cannot impact live systems. So these are, and last but not the least, the remote access, which especially on the OT side, the remote access, whatever remotely is being done, especially from OEM vendors, and what are the, if those activities are being logged and reviewed, in terms of giving you, some kind of view, what is the risk exposure there. So these are the topmost areas which I would say one needs to focus on. So not have a point in point solution, that there's one problem today, patching is a issue, we fix patching. Instead of that, have a overall alignment to a architectural framework in terms of how do you want to go about all components coming together and move towards a automated incident response.
Thanks, Nia. I know we all may or may not have unique best practices to share because it's a community after all. Still, I would request Shital to share anything specific to this, which is your view towards best practices.
So I believe Neha spoke about more on technology part of it. I would like to focus on process part of it. In the sense, we need to document first and foremost what are we going to follow. We need to document that, or say what kind of hardening we are going to do, what kind of reviews we are going to do, logging we are going to do. Document that, and then have those practices implemented, and periodic reviews are also must, so that the process part of it is taken care. At the same time, even the people, the awareness, because mostly these solutions are being handled by, say, third parties. Those resources may or may not be aware of all these risks which are prevalent in this environment. So we need to have awareness sessions for them, specifically focusing the OT systems. So process and people also should be considered when we talk about OT based practices, OT security based practices.
Very well said. And Dr. Yes, I would also invite your uh, views on best practices which you'd like to share.
Right, so they have already covered the process
Yeah.
and the technology part. That leaves only the people part to me. I guess that too is important, but that was on the lighter side. One, it is the people part is certainly important, whether it is IT or OT. I think one basic thing that we need to understand when we are designing OT security is first of all acceptance of the fact that there are going to be a lot of change now. IIoTs are definitely going to come into the system. It is going to be operated by people who would not have the kind of knowledge that we expect them to have. Uh, Rather than actually bringing or taking the IT people into the security, let's train the OT people. Train them. They know how it works. So I'm talking about the people part. Yes, she mentioned that the third party operators and their level of expertise or knowledge is again not going to be as much as you would expect them to be. Accept it, acknowledge it, and then work around it, rather than actually thinking that all of these things are in place and therefore I am kind of not scared about all these things. That is always going to be there. Train in-house people, train the OT people. That is, I think, the approach one has to look at.
Great. So, if I may now just take a liberty to just summarize what all actually the key points that we touched upon since in the last approximately 40 odd minutes. I think we started with on the renewed landscape or the renewed or the new horizon of the landscape. So going forward, it will not be same as we are today, and it's always dynamic. It's changing. We also touched upon a very, very key aspect, that mindset. So there is a convergence which is being seen and experienced in our environment, and we have to accept, we have to attune or fine tune our mindset towards that. Then we come to what Nia mentioned, which is very, very important about retrofitting. That kind of is something which is not going to work. Coming to what Shital highlighted about asset management and typically the visibility of assets, as we know that the visibility of assets is a key component of cybersecurity in IT, and same thing also probably needs to consider in OT as well, which will help us even to take decisions about system hardening. It will even take decisions of taking care of obsolescence, maybe plan and provision, and one size fits all is something which cannot go. Coming to Dr. Yask about typically the OT security architecture topic, as he mentioned, this again he resonated his previous view about converging mindset and also the landscape topic. One tip, very important topic, also we touched in our discussion today about situational awareness and probably a documented process. And also, I think again, Shital touched on behavioral security. So we know that we have to, integrate IT cybersecurity, OT cybersecurity, and behavioral cybersecurity, and also IIoT cybersecurity. All these four stitched together to come out with what we say actual overall security, as a part of design. And lastly, as Dr. Yash highlighted about inducting or rather onboarding and enabling business as well as our resources in OT so that they can also appreciate the purpose, objective, and concept of cybersecurity. I think very, very well orchestrated message that we want to convey to our audience. And we have not received any other questions as we have received earlier. So probably Hira, back to you. So we have Hira, you still? Acha, we have one more question. Sorry. So we have few more minutes. So maybe anyone now take this question. Questions comes from Niranjan Singh. He asks that how about the product update security? And please share your views. I believe he's trying to understand the purpose and the concept of product security and solutions. So anybody, if you would like to take up this question.
I
So
would
maybe
say,
let me reorchestrate. I think product solution security is not only about security updates. It's not only about ensuring that the latest security patch is released or maybe the security threats which are being identified by the research and development or specific way it gets conveyed to the customer. It also integrates with the culture, the knowledge, the awareness, the processes all integrated together. So one more question I can see. I believe this may be the last question before we wind up today. We get again a question from Niranjan. Thanks, Niranjan, for keeping us busy with your interesting and exciting questions. So he asks, access security is one of the fundamental requirement where based on the associated quantitative risk, the control management shall be applied. So please share some more insights to get it possible in execution mode. So I think he's trying to understand about security fundamentals, control measurements, and probably applying both together. So anyone, we are just having one more minute. Yeah, Dr. Yash.
So very quickly, two things he said. One was on the product update. I think that was about, I presume, on the patching part. So
Mhm.
one very quick response to just add to what you said. In case OT is made up of a lot of legacy systems. Some of the times the patches are actually not meant for those systems. Therefore, do look at the compensatory controls in case the patches or product updates cannot be done, at least at the perimeter layer. Some kind of a compensation is to be done for the risks that are there. The second question was on the access, and I believe what the question is that access, granting the access of the identity is a
Yeah,
very important aspect. Yes, I think in fact, I think Neha touched on the zero trust concept. This is where we are heading to, in which the access is going to play one very important role, in which not just the device but also the user, the time, the place from which is being accessed, and all those things are going to be taken. Yes, if the question was how is that going to be managed, there are now some tools and technologies, and but you have to build upon it. Again, zero trust is just a concept; it is not a product. You keep that as an objective, and then you work on it. I'm
lovely.
sorry, I'm trying to
I
rush.
think I think we are just in time, and I thank you, DSCI, for having us. And it was really a very exciting and very engaging session. So thank you, DSCI, and back to Ishan Hira.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Amitava, for wonderfully moderating the session, and thanks a lot every panelist for giving such an insight. Thanks a lot, Dr. Yas. Thanks a lot, Mr. Sheetal, and thanks a lot, Mr. Singh. Thanks.
Thank you,
Looking
and
forward for more. Yeah.
Thank
sure.
you.
Take
thank
care.
you.
Bye for the day. Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.